Okay, we are Hilchos Treifos. We are on Siman Mem Aleph, the Treifos of the liver. Okay, just a quick throwback to yesterday. In Siman Mem, so I did double check. Thank you for stopping me. In the Seif Gimel, the Kufa of the needle. So all the Perushim are identical, that it's referring to the same side, not to the pointed side. Rashi calls it the Rosh Ha'av, the thick head. The Gershom says it's the end of the needle. Some translate it as the eye of the needle or the ball of the needle. It's all referring to the opposite end of the sharp end. And we're going to have this similar case brought up again. The idea is, if you read the Ramah inside, I'm not going to reread it, that basically it's going down with the blunted head. The rounded side going down.
And that's the Rosh here also, is that same side.
Right, so so it's all the same. And the idea is it's going down the pipe, and the question is did it pierce through the veshet, or the abdominal cavity, and then get to the kaved? That would be a treifa. Or did it come through the circulatory system, or through the lungs without getting any kind of holes? That's really what it's all about. Okay, so let's go to Bet. I'm just going to quickly reread Bet. Okay, Mem Aleph, Seif Bet. Shiur Zed Zaitim. So again, we're learning the kaved, the minimum, even if most of it disappears, as long as, right, if it's all disappeared, then it's a treifa, the liver. But as long as you have at least, we mentioned 2 zaisim, right? And b'makom chiyuso and b'makom by the mara. So, right, that's what we wrote. So that's what are these zaisim? So the shear is, it's what we call 2 zaisim, whether it's about a third or about a half of an egg. That's what the minimum shear always is for any behema, filo b'shor hagadol, even if it's a large ox, one that's larger than usual, just the average normal 2 zaisim is all you need. Ube'of, regarding a chicken or a bird, then hakol lefi godlo ktano. Then it goes by the size of, so the Kaf HaChaim clarifies, it's not actually the size of the chicken, it's the size of the liver of the chicken. You compare the average size of a cow, the average size to this species of bird that you're using, you compare the proportion of the livers to each other, and that's how it goes. That's how he writes. Maybe someone says otherwise, I don't know. But regarding a behema daka, so there's a machloket if that's also based on the proportion, or it's the same 2 zaisim, so it comes out a little bit lechumra for a daka, right? A sheep, etc. So there, it's a machloket achronim, but the vast majority, and the Kaf HaChaim says lahalacha, Mata Yonasan, and others, that it's always the 2 regular zaisim. The only kula that we know about that's mentioned, and we are dealing with with a treifa of deraisa here, and the only kula that's been given is by a bird. So that's the only one who gets the exception. Okay, let's continue with Seif Gimel. Okay, again, treifos of the liver, Yavesha Kaved. And now the kaved dries up. Acha nifrach b'tziporin shreifa. And you're able to scrape off. It's so dry, it just scrapes right off when you rub it with your nail. So that's a treifa. Vehu she'avesh kulo. Well, let me just say, we just said you scrape off the nail, but the halacha is, we learned in Siman Lamed Vav, it's lav dafka scraping off, even if you could take your nail and you can run it, you dip your nail a little bit, you press into the liver if it's dry, or here, yeah. And similar to by the lung, and if it stays, the sirtut, the mark from sliding your nail against it, if it stays, then that's also considered a yavesh, and would make it a treifa. Kavachayim clarifies, if you're allowed to let it sit there, and if it comes, it could take its time. If it comes back to its original state, then that's not yavesh. It's only if it's permanent. But he says you can't rub it too much or blow on it too much to get it to go back to its state. It has to go back to its state naturally. Okay. V'hu sheyavesh kulo. That's if the entire kaved is dried. V'lo nishtayer kazayid b'makom maro kazayid b'makom chiyuto. But that's if you're not left with those two ksesim. Because we learned, even if most of the livers disappears and you're just left with those two ksesim, you're fine. So it's the same thing here. Even if most of it is dry, but at least these two are still somewhat moist, then it is kshera. Haga, im yavshu elu, has shnei ksesim, levad nami treifa. So now the Ramah goes a little, takes it one step further. He says, really everything is dependent on these two ksesim. So, bein lakula, bein lachumra. So if these two completely dry out, even though the rest of it is moist, so then it has a din of a treifa. Nimuka kaved, dahainu shedam yotzim basar kaved shenimak vayaladam treifa. Now, if the liver became soft, well, mushy, soft, and bloody, that the blood just exudes from the flesh, so then it's called a treifa. Alpha pi shenishtaru shnek zesim. Even if two of them are going to be, you have those two kazesim are still intact, and they're 100% like normal, it still has a din of a treifa, disofo lira kev hakol. Because there's an assumption when it comes to being, dissolved, decayed, and it's soft, when this happens, the process is going to continue, and therefore has a din of a treifa, because the process is going to continue, and we say it's not going to live a year like a treifa. One second. Right, I just want to point out the Shach, Taz, they argue on this Ramah, and they say as long as the two Zaysim are there, then it's going to be a Kshera. And that's based on the Beis Yosef. So, okay, anyways. Yesh. And the Tavua Shor says to be Machmer unless there's Hefsid Meruba. So, different opinions on the issue, what to do. Okay. Right, so the Shach also says, Behefsid Meruba, any Tzorach, Yesh Lahaka. Now, Yesh Omrim, the Ramah continues, Yesh Omrim, Kaved Shekasha Ke'even Treifa. If the entire kaved becomes hard, like a stone, even if it's not completely dried out, but it's completely hard, not normal, treifa has the din of a treifa, v'hu, now here the Ramah says, v'hu shelo nishtayru, v'ashnei zeisim v'niskrim shelo nitkashu. That's if it entirely became hard. But here he allows those, at least these two kazeisim, because if it's hard, it's like it's missing, and the process might not continue. It's different in the where it got decayed and soft. Okay, Dalet. Hitliya hakaved. Now what if the liver gets infested with worms? Afilu b'makom mara u'b'makom chiyuso kshera. So it's okay. It's still a kshera. The worms is not. It's not something that's going to make it a treifa that's going to die within 12 months. And it's not a problem. Even in those two areas, because those two most important areas, the two kazesim by the mar and chiyuso, it's still fine. Hey, ne'ekar hakaved b'mkomos harbe. Now, what happens if the liver became looser than normal? It became mostly detached from its source. It's usually attached with the klayot and with the diaphragm, and it's all there. But here, it became mostly detached. Ume'ora betarpeshin, kan me'at v'kan me'at. But it's still attached to the diaphragm a little bit here and there. So then, it's a kshera. The Kaf HaChaim has a tzarech iyun if it's completely detached. Well, if it'd be completely detached and it's just rolling around, that's the same as it's missing. That's not a shaila. If it's still attached, let's say to the kidneys, it's still there, it's still functioning, but but otherwise from the diaphragm and from its normal attachment, it's completely detached. That's a tzarech iyun. Okay. Vav. Again, remember, most of these issues rarely come up, and you never check for them anyway. So it's rare to find these treifos unless you're cooking them, and then as you're dealing with them, you find these things. Okay, Vav. Machat shenimtza b'kaved. Now here we find a needle, and it's embedded in the liver. Mein shaba lefanenu shalim, and so I believe he's talking about the cases it's still embedded in the wall of the liver. This case is in the Gemara. The case we had before, it's not. It's only in the Rishonim. But anyway, so here you have it embedded in the wall of the liver. Now I'm just going to point out there's 11 organs where you have a hole and it goes through it. It makes it a treifa. For whatever reason, the kaved is not one of them. If you have a hole in the wall of the kaved itself, that would not make it a treifa. The only issue why we have issues with the kaved and there being a hole in a needle is because we're worried that how did it get to the kaved? It went through something that would make it a treifa. For example, it went through perhaps the esophagus. So a hole through the esophagus would make it a treifa, not the windpipe, that we learned. Also, there's blood vessels. So the blood vessels that lead to the kaved, though if there's a puncture in one of them, that would also make it a treifa. But, and there's a machloket, the Rambam says even the blood vessels in the kaved, the Ravid says no, it's only on the blood vessels outside of the kaved, but okay, I'm not sure if the Shulchan Aruch is machriya, but that's the main point. Okay, the blood vessels outside the kaved, everybody says would make it a treifa. It's only on the inside. It's a machloket rishonim. Okay, so let's read this again. Machat shenimtza b'kaved. You find a needle right through the kaved. Bein shaba lefanenu shalim, bein shaba chatilch. Now it doesn't matter if when you discover it, the kaved was cut open or not. Im tzad ha'av shelo. This is the wide side. This is the rosh, the kufa. If it's litzad chalala behema, we'll call it the head. Okay, there's the head side and the pointy side. So now the head side is outside of the kaved and it's facing the abdominal cavity. Again, and we're going to see also a case when it's found in the abdominal cavity just loose. What's the halacha? Generally, we're machmer. That's the halacha. And okay, we'll see. We'll keep reading. We'll see a bit more to clarify this. Now, if the head wide side is on the outside of the kaved and the needle, the pointy part, is facing the inside, afilu kulo tamun babasar, even if it's completely in the fleshy part of the kaved, of the liver, it's a treifa. Okay, then it has a din of a treifa. Because we're assuming it entered from outside the liver, and on the way there it punctured something, one of the organs or the esophagus or something to get there. V'im tzad hadak shelo klape chutz, but if the pointy side is pointed outside of the kaved and the head is on the inside of the kaved, so then kshera, we say it's a kshera. Sha'anu tolim lomar derech simpon ba sham. We say that we're assuming that it got into the liver first, and we're going to take on the assumption that it got in through one of the blood vessels in a non-treifa fashion. Okay. Haga, v'davka shetzad ha'av pona litzad hasimpon. Now this is only if the thicker side, is pointing vertically or in the direction of the blood vessel. But if it's pointed in a way that it's sideways and it's not likely to have gone through the simpon. I'll just call it horizontally if that helps to understand, but obviously it depends how the liver and the body is oriented. B'cho inyan treifa. So if we're worried that which way it may have come, then we call it that it wasn't likely that it just simply just flowed through the blood vessel, then we say it's a treifa. Now, this is important. Bamed varim amurim, when are we talking about that we could be mekel? When do we have the hava mina to be tola lahakel, that it's a kshira? It's only with a machat gasa. It's only if the needle is a very thick needle. Aval bedaka ein chiluk utreifa. But if you have a thin needle, it's always a treifa. It doesn't matter on the orientation, because since it's a thin needle, it can easily go through, even through the head. The head could also poke through. Veshiur gasa, and what is gasa? When can the needle be thick enough to say it's kosher, it's a ksher, the animal's a kshera, and we're tola lahakel? It's only if the needle, the head side is keshiur gar'ina shel tamara. It has to be where it's as thick and as round as the pit of a date. So the Kaf HaChaim writes, nowadays we always assume it's not like a tamara, and so there's never a nafkamina if it's thick or thin. And halachas, it's you find a needle, it's always a treifa, either vade or suffix, depends. Probably just a suffix, but well, it depends. Okay, I'll take that back. It depends on the situation, but it's always going to be a din of a treifa. Okay, now just interesting to point out, this a little bit of a follow-up of what we learned a little bit earlier about eating in someone else's home. So here, so what happens if you find a needle and in a situation where we're going to call it a treifa? So we're being told that it's a treifa, but before you discover that, the other parts of the animal was taken, kashered, and you used it for your kalim to eat from it. So you cooked with such, let's say you cooked it before you opened it up and found it. So you cooked the other parts of the animal. And now you have, and the animal's a treifa now. Or paskanin, it's a treifa. So you can eat it. But what about the kalim? Can you use the kalim or do you have to kasher it? So the Kaf HaChaim b'shem the Pri Chadash.
Situation where you found a needle in the liver after you cooked it. That's what we're talking about.
Right, exactly. So lemafreya, after you cooked it, you find that it's a treifa. But I'm assuming the question is only if it's a suffix treifa, depending if you're tola, not a vadai treifa. So in that case, the Kaf HaChaim points out, we're going to get to this later on when we learn about tarovis of kalim b'nei yoman and not, but the Kaf HaChaim, based on the Pri Chadash and the Aruch HaShulchan, say the kalim are kosher. You're allowed to cook with the kalim going forward, because it's a case of, I guess, a suffix, and I have to see it inside, but a case of a suffix, and now I saw the Kaf HaChaim inside. But anyway, so then the kalim now, to use it within 24 hours, you will not be allowed to use it. But once 24 hours pass, it's only a din derabanan of agzera, of kalim einam b'nei yoman, and so therefore, in this case, when we're tola this way and that way, but we don't know for sure, so then you're allowed to use the kalim. Tavua shor is machmer. That's same as simla chadasha. Anyways, just to point it out. Okay, Zayin. Machat shenimtza b'simpon gadol shebekaved. Now, if you find a needle in the big blood vessel of the kaved, going into the liver, v'hu simpon akana shenichnas b'tocho, right? That leads into there. V'chen yenimtza b'simpon gadol shereya. So too, if you find a machat, this needle in the blood vessel of the reya, the liver, kshera, we say it's a kshera. Okay, Yud Bet. Nikav tarpa shakaved nekev mefulash mitzada. Kaved treifa. So now, if you find a hole in the tarpasha kaved, a hole that goes through and through, and on the side of the kaved, it would make it a treifa. I believe we're talking about the diaphragm. But if it's referring to a membrane around the kaved, I'm not sure. Okay. Right. Okay. Chet. No, let's keep reading. Sorry. Aval. Im nisrcha besircha betzela kashera. But again, if you find any kind of a sircha, an adhesion, going from anywhere, let's say from the kaved or the diaphragm to the wall to the rib cage, it's a kshera. As this we learned earlier, that the only time we say these bubbles, a bua or a sircha, the adhesion makes it a treifa, we assume it was a hole in a place that'll make it a treifa. The only time we say that is by the liver, the lung. Thank you, the reya, that we say in Lamed Vav. But when it comes to the other body parts, there is no halacha of a sircha by itself making it a treifa. Again, let's see if it's here. Well, when we get to, I think, Mem Vav, there's a caveat to that rule, but that's the general rule. Okay, Haga. V'im nisrach tarpa shakave lebeit hakosot, yesh livdok bekeres. But so here's one caveat. We'll see another one over there. That actually, if you have it going from the asircha, going from the tarpasha kaved to the beit hakosot, it's the second stomach. I forget the name in English, but it's the second one. It's the one that has all those. It's the one that has all the little cups in there, or all the little, not grooves, whatever, shapes through by the. Anyways, whatever it is, beit hakosot. Yesh livdok bekeres. You have to check the keres. That's the first stomach. Shebevadai, because if you have a sircha from one to another, the assumption is strong assumption, so you have to check. Yesham kotes omacha chenikva, that there was a needle that was swallowed by the animal, it came into the keres, and then it punctured outside, or it went to the kosot. Kosot is the second stomach that catches all kinds of stuff. The animal first swallows it, goes into the keres, the first stomach, and from there it goes into the beit kosot, the second stomach, and with all those little cup-shaped grooves, it catches all of the what's it called? Needles, rocks. You can find all kinds of stuff in there, and that's where it starts the digesting system until it gets regurgitated to the mouth and then back afterwards to the later stomachs. Okay. And sircha, and that's how the sircha was formed. So therefore you have to check. And I actually witnessed such a case, the Rama writes, and therefore this is the practice, this is the minhag. Nimsa machal tarpash safek treifa, if it's find the needle in the tarpash itself, the diaphragm, it's a safek treifa. Let's just finish here. Nimsu shnei kvedim, the behema, or be'of treifa. If you find two separate livers in the animal or a chicken, it's a treifa. The kol yeter kenatul dami, v'havele kenital hakaved. Because if you have an extra one, the halachic principle is it's as if you have an extra one, as if it's not even there, and therefore you're left with nothing. And right, we learned if it's missing, it's a treifa. The halach, we consider both of them as not there, and it's an absolute treifa if it has more than one.